The Vance family did not live in a home. They occupied a command center. The sprawling minimalist estate in Atherton, California, was less a symbol of domestic bliss and more a monument to the cold, brilliant mind of its creator, Harrison Vance. Harrison was a titan, a first-generation tech legend who had built his multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, Vance Innovations, from a garage startup into a global force in software and artificial intelligence. He was a man who valued two things above all else: loyalty and results. His son, Ardian Vance, had struggled his entire life to deliver on both. Ardian was the CEO of Vance Media, a subsidiary of the larger conglomerate. It was a respectable, profitable division focused on digital content and streaming services. But in the galaxy of Vance Innovations, it was a minor planet orbiting the sun that was Harrison. Ardian hadn't built Vance Media. He had inherited its leadership. He lived in a state of perpetual simmering resentment, desperate to prove that the Vance name on his office door was more than just a birthright. The bridge between the distant, demanding father and the resentful, insecure son was Clara Vance. Clara was Ardian's wife, a woman of quiet intelligence, grace, and a warmth that seemed entirely out of place in the sterile world of the Vances. A former art curator, she had a genuine, deep, and loving relationship with her father-in-law. Harrison, a man not known for his sentimentality, adored her. He saw in Clara the integrity, loyalty, and strength he found lacking in his own son. She was, in his eyes, more of a Vance than Ardian was. Now, Clara was 7 months pregnant with the first Vance grandchild. To Harrison, this was not just a family milestone. It was a matter of legacy. The future of his empire, the continuation of his life's work, was growing inside the one person in his family he unequivocally trusted. The tension in the house of Vance was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of their opulent lives. Ardian saw his father's affection for Clara as a betrayal, another piece of evidence that he would never measure up. He treated his wife's bond with his father as a threat, a secret alliance against him. "You're always taking his side," he would accuse Clara after a tense Sunday dinner at the estate. "You look at him with this admiration. You never look at me that way." "That's not true, Ardian," Clara would reply gently, trying to soothe his fragile ego. "I admire you, but your father is a legend. Of course, I respect him." "He's a tyrant," Ardian would mutter, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "And he uses you to control me." Clara dismissed his paranoia as stress. The pressure he was under was immense. But lately, his resentment had taken on a sharper, crueler edge. He had become distant, working late, his phone always angled away from her. He was more concerned with the public image of their marriage than the private reality of it. Unbeknownst to Clara and Harrison, Ardian had begun an affair. His mistress was Chloe Sterling, a beautiful, ambitious actress with a minor role on a popular streaming show produced by Vance Media. Chloe was everything Clara was not: fiery, demanding, and deeply impressed by Ardian's power. She flattered his ego, praised his vision, and encouraged his rebellion against his father. She was the spark he thought he needed to finally set his own world on fire, not realizing it would be a funeral pyre for the life he knew. The betrayal, when it came, was not a quiet, private heartbreak. It was a public execution, meticulously planned and brutally executed by Ardian. He chose the annual Vance Innovations Philanthropy Gala as his stage. The event was the pinnacle of the Silicon Valley social calendar, a gathering of the tech world's most powerful figures, all there to pay tribute to the man at the center of their universe, Harrison Vance. Clara, radiant in a deep blue gown that accentuated her pregnant form, felt a sense of unease all evening. Ardian was strangely attentive, almost performatively so. He held her hand tightly, kissed her for the cameras, and never strayed far from her side. She mistook his behavior for a renewed sense of affection, a sign that they were moving past their recent tensions. In reality, he was positioning his victim in the center of the spotlight before pulling the trigger. The moment he chose was during his own speech. As the CEO of Vance Media, he was scheduled to give a short presentation on the Foundation's work in digital literacy. He walked to the podium, looking confident and handsome. He spoke eloquently about the future of media, about their commitment to quality content. And then he went off script. "As we look to the future," he said, his voice taking on a somber tone, "we must also be honest about our pasts and be brave enough to forge new paths, which is why it is with a heavy heart that I must announce that my wife, Clara, and I have made the difficult but mutual decision to separate." A shocked, collective gasp swept through the ballroom. 300 of the most influential people in the world turned to stare at Clara, who was seated at the head table next to a stunned Harrison. Her smile froze on her face, her mind struggling to process his words. Mutual decision? This was the first she was hearing of it. Ardian continued, his voice filled with a practiced, false sincerity. "Clara is a wonderful woman, and she will be an incredible mother. I will always respect her, but our paths have diverged. I wish her nothing but the best." It was a perfectly crafted statement, painting him as a sensitive, modern man making a painful but mature choice. But then, as he was stepping away from the podium, a reporter from a notorious tech gossip site, clearly tipped off, shouted a question. "Ardian, is it true that you're now in a relationship with actress Chloe Sterling?" Ardian paused, a dramatic, calculated hesitation. He turned back to the microphone, a faint, almost sad smile on his face. "Chloe and I have grown very close," he said. "She's a remarkable woman, and I would ask that you all respect our privacy as we begin this new chapter." The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and the frantic clicking of camera phones. He had not just announced his divorce, he had announced his affair from the stage of his own father's gala. He had taken the most private, painful moment of his wife's life and turned it into a public relations strategy for his new relationship. Clara sat frozen, the blood draining from her face. The air in her lungs felt thick, impossible to breathe. It was a humiliation so profound, so absolute that it felt like a physical blow. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She looked at her father-in-law. Harrison Vance's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He was not looking at Ardian. He was looking at Clara, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. A hand gently touched her arm. It was Harrison's head of security. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "Let's go." They rose, and with as much dignity as she could muster, Clara allowed herself to be escorted from the ballroom, a silent, graceful exit from the wreckage of her life. As she walked, she could hear the pop of flashbulbs behind her as Ardian, her husband, posed for the first official photos with his new love, the actress Chloe Sterling, who had just coincidentally arrived at the gala. The ride back to the Atherton estate was a silent, suffocating journey. Clara stared out the window of the Rolls-Royce, the glittering lights of Silicon Valley blurring into meaningless streaks. She felt nothing. The shock had cauterized her emotions, leaving a profound, hollow numbness. Harrison sat beside her, his large frame rigid, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees. He did not speak, but the rage emanating from him was a palpable, physical force in the car. When they arrived at the estate, Harrison led her not to a guest room, but to the master suite wing, to a beautiful private apartment overlooking the gardens that he and his late wife had prepared years ago, hoping it would one day be a nursery for their grandchildren. "This is your home now, Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "For as long as you need it." Clara finally broke. the numbness giving way to a tidal wave of grief. She collapsed into a chair, her body racked with sobs. Harrison stood by helplessly for a moment, a man more comfortable with hostile takeovers than with tears. He then did something he rarely did. He walked over and placed a heavy, comforting hand on her shoulder, a silent promise of unwavering support. An hour later, the sound of a car screeching up the long driveway announced Ardian's arrival. He had clearly been drinking, his face flushed with a mixture of celebratory adrenaline and belligerent defiance. He strode into the grand hall of the main house, expecting to find Clara, ready to deliver a speech he had no doubt rehearsed about his right to be happy. Instead, he found his father waiting for him, standing alone in the center of the vast marble-floored room. "Where is she?" Ardian demanded, foregoing any greeting. "Clara is resting," Harrison said, his voice dangerously calm. "She will not be speaking with you. Not tonight. Not ever again without a lawyer present." "Oh, come on, father," Ardian scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't be so dramatic. It was a clean break. Better to be honest about it than to drag it out for months." Harrison stared at his son, his eyes filled with a look of such profound contempt that Ardian faltered for a moment. "A clean break?" Harrison repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You took your pregnant wife, the woman carrying your child, my grandchild, and you publicly humiliated her in front of the entire world. You used my foundation, my name, my house, as the stage for the launch of your sordid little affair. You call that a clean break? I call it a declaration of war." Ardian's fear was quickly replaced by his lifelong resentment. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the confrontation he had been craving. "This is my life, father," he shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "Mine, not a division of Vance Innovations. You don't control me. You don't get to approve of my choices. I am my own man." "You are a fool," Harrison said, his voice cutting through Ardian's tirade like a shard of ice. "You have never been your own man. You are a man who has lived his entire life on an allowance of my money, my reputation, and my tolerance. You have mistaken my generosity for your own success." He took a step forward, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "You are correct about one thing. I don't control your personal life. You are free to sleep with whomever you wish. You are free to make a fool of yourself in the tabloids. But I do control your company. I do control your inheritance. I do control the name you so carelessly disgrace." He stopped, standing inches from his son. "And you, Ardian," he said, his voice a low, final decree, "have just made a catastrophic, career-ending, life-altering miscalculation." He turned his back on his son, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "My security will see you out. You are no longer welcome in this house. Your access to the company's accounts and properties has been terminated, effective immediately. You will hear from my lawyers in the morning regarding your position at Vance Media." Ardian stood stunned into silence. The drunken bravado evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying understanding of what he had just done. He had not just broken his marriage. He had broken the unwritten covenant with the source of all his power. "You can't do that," Ardian whispered, his voice trembling. Harrison paused at the doorway but did not turn around. "I can," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a billion-dollar empire. "And I will." The morning after the gala, the business world awoke to a new, shocking reality. Harrison Vance, a man known for his strategic patience and emotional restraint, moved with the speed and ferocity of a lightning strike. He did not delegate. He did not deliberate. He acted. At 7 a.m. sharp, he convened an emergency teleconference of the executive board of the parent company, Vance Innovations. The board was comprised of long-serving, fiercely loyal members who owed their careers and their fortunes to Harrison. They were less a board of directors and more a council of war. Harrison's announcement was brief and brutal. Effective immediately, Ardian Vance is suspended from his duties as CEO of the Vance Media subsidiary, pending a leadership review. I am invoking my authority as chairman and majority shareholder to freeze all capital allocations and intercompany resource sharing with Vance Media. They are, for all intents and purposes, quarantined. There were no objections. There was only a stunned silence, followed by quiet affirmations of support. The board knew that Harrison's personal and professional lives were inextricably linked. An attack on his family was an attack on the stability of the entire empire, and he was cauterizing the wound before the infection could spread. Ardian received the news not from his father, but from a coldly worded official email from the board's secretary. He was sitting in the hotel suite he had shared with Chloe Sterling, a half-eaten room service breakfast congealing on the table. He read the email, then read it again, the words blurring in front of his eyes. Suspended. Capital frozen. Leadership review. It was a corporate death sentence. Vance Media, while profitable, was heavily reliant on the parent company's vast resources. It used Vance Innovations' proprietary AI for its content recommendation algorithms, its massive server farms for its streaming services, and its deep pockets for new acquisitions. Without that support, Vance Media was a ship without an engine, dead in the water. Chloe, who had been excitedly reading the glowing press coverage of their debut as a couple, noticed his ashen face. "What is it, honey?" she asked, her voice bright. "My father," Ardian choked out. "He's cutting me off. He's freezing the company." The concern on Chloe's face was instantly replaced by a flicker of something else. A cold, calculating fear. This was not what she had signed up for. She had attached herself to a prince, a powerful heir. She had not signed up for a pariah in the midst of a family war with a king who held all the cards. While Ardian was reeling, Harrison was making his next move. He summoned his personal legal team, a cadre of the most feared corporate lawyers in Silicon Valley. His instructions were simple. "I want you to conduct a full audit of the Vance Family Trust and my personal will," he commanded. "I want to explore every legal avenue to restructure my son's inheritance. Find the character and integrity clause we drafted years ago. I want to know exactly how much latitude it gives me." He then turned to the head of his M&A team. "I also want a full valuation of the Vance Media division. I want to know what its assets are worth, stripped of the Vance Innovations infrastructure. I want to know what it would look like if we broke it up and sold it for parts." The message was clear. He was not just sidelining his son. He was preparing to erase him, both from the family fortune and from the corporate empire he had built. For Clara, these days were a strange, surreal blur. She was ensconced in the quiet luxury of the Seacliff estate, shielded from the storm. Harrison had insisted she see a top obstetrician to ensure the stress hadn't affected the baby. He had provided her with a discreet therapist. He treated her not as a victim to be pitied, but as a valued family member who had been wounded and needed to heal. He visited her every evening in her suite. He didn't speak much of his plans regarding Ardian. He would simply sit with her, ask about the baby, and talk about the future in broad, reassuring strokes. One evening, he found her looking at a proposal she had written months before, a passion project she had presented to Ardian, who had dismissed it as unprofitable. It was a plan to create a foundation within Vance Media dedicated to funding and developing high-quality educational children's programming. "He said it was a distraction from our core business," Clara said, her voice tinged with a lingering sadness. Harrison took the proposal and read it, his expression thoughtful. "He was a fool," he said after a long silence. "This isn't a distraction, it's a legacy." He handed the proposal back to her, a strange, determined glint in his eye. "Don't throw this away, Clara. I think you might have a use for it very soon." Clara was confused by the remark, but in the coming days she would understand. Harrison Vance was not just dismantling his son's world. He was already planning what to build in its place, and he had decided that the architect of the family's future would not be his own son, but the woman his son had so foolishly cast aside. While Ardian was frantically trying to stop the bleeding at Vance Media, his power and influence draining away with each passing hour, Harrison Vance was orchestrating his masterstroke. It was a move of such breathtaking audacity and strategic brilliance that it would be talked about in Silicon Valley for years to come. It was not just an act of punishment against his son, it was a fundamental reordering of his own legacy. He called a second, even more exclusive meeting. This time it was not the full board, but his core inner circle, his chief financial officer, the head of his legal team, and a few trusted, long-serving board members. They met in the main conference room at the Vance Innovations campus, a room known as the Observatory for its panoramic views and the high-stakes decisions made within it. Harrison stood before them, not as an emotional father, but as the visionary chairman who had guided the company for 4 decades. Vance Innovations has always been about the future, he began, his voice calm and authoritative. We have pioneered advancements in artificial intelligence, in software, in enterprise solutions. But the world is changing. The public's trust in technology is eroding. They see us, rightly or wrongly, as amoral behemoths. We need to do more than just innovate. We need to invest in our own humanity. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Therefore, I am announcing a major new strategic initiative. We are forming a new, independent division within the conglomerate. This division will have a dual mandate to act as a venture capital fund for ethical and socially responsible technology, and to oversee all of the Vance family's philanthropic endeavors. It will be the moral and creative compass of our entire organization. He let the announcement sink in. It was a massive, unexpected move. This new division, he continued, will be seeded with an initial endowment of $1 billion from the Vance Family Trust. A quiet gasp went through the room. $1 billion was a staggering sum, even for a company of their size. And, Harrison said, delivering the final, stunning blow, it will be called the Clara Vance Foundation. Its president and chief executive officer will be Clara Vance. The silence in the room was absolute. The implications were seismic. He had not just created a new, powerful division, he had put his daughter-in-law, a woman with no official corporate title, in charge of it. He had taken a significant portion of the family's wealth and future and handed it to her. Clara, Harrison explained, his tone leaving no room for argument, possesses the integrity, the vision, and the character that this initiative requires. Her background in the arts and her passion for education make her uniquely qualified to guide our investments in a more humane direction. She will have the full, unconditional support of this board and this company. It was checkmate. He had effectively elevated Clara to a position of immense power within the Vance empire, making her a senior executive on par with the heads of his most important divisions. She was no longer just the estranged wife of a subsidiary CEO. She was the face of the company's future, the steward of its soul. He had created a new heir. The public announcement was released an hour later. The news spread like wildfire. It was a brilliant PR move, recasting the narrative from a sordid family drama into a story of a visionary company empowering a woman of integrity. The press lauded the move, praising Harrison's bold vision and Clara's quiet strength. When Clara first heard the news from Harrison himself, she was stunned into silence. I don't know what to say, she stammered. I don't have the experience to run something like that. You have the character, Harrison replied simply. That is the only qualification that matters. I will give you the best team in the world to support you. All I need from you is your vision and your integrity. This foundation, Clara, is for you and your child. It is your inheritance. It is the future of this family. I am asking you to lead it. It was an incredible, terrifying opportunity. It was a chance to take the ideas she was passionate about the ideas Ardian had dismissed, and turn them into a powerful force for good. It was her chance to build her own legacy, a legacy for her child, separate from the wreckage of her marriage. "Yes," she said finally, her voice filled with a new, quiet determination. "Yes, I'll do it." For Ardian, the news was the final, soul-crushing blow. He saw it on a news alert on his phone while sitting in a sterile lawyer's office. He read the headline, "Harrison Vance launches billion-dollar foundation headed by daughter-in-law Clara Vance," and he felt a kind of psychological vertigo. His father had not just disowned him, he had replaced him. He had taken his wife, the woman he had cast aside, and elevated her to a position of power and prestige that he, the son and heir, had never been able to achieve on his own. His rebellion, his desperate attempt to escape his father's shadow, had resulted in the one outcome he had always feared most. He had been rendered utterly, completely irrelevant. The creation of the Clara Vance Foundation was the public-facing, philanthropic masterstroke. But behind the scenes, the siege of Vance Media was a campaign of a different sort, a cold, brutal, and systematic dismantling of a corporate entity, orchestrated by a man who treated business as a bloodless form of warfare. The first blow landed not with a bang, but with a quiet, digital hum. On a Monday morning, the entire technological infrastructure of Vance Media began to seize up. The crisis started in the engineering department. A frantic series of alerts pinged across their screens. Dr. Eris Thorne, the brilliant but perpetually stressed head of engineering, watched in horror as her diagnostic panels lit up with red warnings. The connection to the Vance Innovations mainframe, the supercomputing core that housed the Prometheus AI, had been severed. She burst into Ardian's glass-walled office, her face a mask of controlled panic. "He's done it, Ardian," she said, her voice tight. "He's cut us off. Your father has unplugged us from the mothership." Ardian, who had been trying to project an aura of defiant normalcy, felt a cold spike of fear. "What are you talking about?" "The Prometheus AI!" Eris exclaimed, her voice rising. "Our entire content recommendation engine, our ad-serving platform, our user analytics, it all runs on Prometheus. Without it, our streaming service is just a glorified YouTube channel from 2008. We are flying blind, and the engine has just flamed out." The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. By noon, Vance Media Down was trending on social media. Users were complaining of a clunky, unresponsive interface and bizarrely irrelevant content suggestions. The company's automated ad sales platform, which generated millions in revenue per day, was failing, unable to target users effectively. They were not just losing viewers, they were actively hemorrhaging money with every passing second. Ardian convened an emergency meeting of his executive team. The atmosphere in the boardroom, once a place of arrogant self-congratulation, was now thick with the stench of fear. He tried to rally them, his voice unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "This is a temporary measure," he insisted, pacing in front of the panoramic window. "A negotiating tactic. My father is a bully, and this is how he operates. He's trying to scare us. We need to hold the line, show him we won't be intimidated. We'll build our own AI. We'll find new partners." Elena Hayes, his pragmatic and long-suffering COO, looked at him as if he were a delusional child. "Build our own AI, Ardian?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Prometheus is the result of a 20-year, $5 billion investment from Vance Innovations. You expect us to replicate it with what resources?" The capital financing for our entire fall slate was frozen this morning. Our top 3 production partners have already put us on notice for breach of contract. We are in a state of corporate cardiac arrest, and you were talking about training for a marathon. She leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a siege. And the enemy isn't at the gates. He's in our own server rooms. and he has just turned off the power. We need a survival strategy, not a suicide mission." His own team was looking at him not as a leader, but as the architect of their ruin. His authority had evaporated. He was a king with no army, no treasury, and no castle. Desperate and enraged, Ardian turned to the only weapon he thought he had left: the law. He retained Sterling Kyle, a notoriously aggressive litigator known for his scorched earth tactics. In Kyle's gleaming Century City office, Ardian vented his fury, outlining a massive, multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against his own father. "We'll depose him," Ardian raged, pacing the plush carpet. "We'll subpoena every document from Vance Innovations for the last decade. We'll expose him for the tyrant he is." Kyle, a man who saw conflict as a business opportunity, eagerly drafted a blistering legal threat. It was a 20-page document filled with accusations of breach of fiduciary duty, tortious interference, and corporate sabotage. It was a declaration of all-out legal war. He had it sent via a stone-faced courier to Harrison's legal department. The response arrived the following afternoon. It was not a legal brief, but a slim, elegant portfolio delivered by a quiet, unassuming legal aide. Inside was a single-page letter, a masterpiece of understated, terrifying force. It stated in cool, formal language that should Ardian proceed with his frivolous and vexatious lawsuit, the discovery process would, of course, be a two-way street. It would compel Vance Innovations to publicly release the full, unredacted findings of its internal leadership review of the Vance Media Division. Attached was a 2-page summary of said review. It was not a collection of vague accusations. It was a forensic accounting of Ardian's professional and personal misconduct, a timeline of his failures. It listed, with dates and amounts, the improper use of corporate accounts for personal travel, apartments, and gifts for Miss Chloe Sterling. It referenced sworn affidavits from female employees detailing a pattern of inappropriate behavior. It included a detailed analysis from the parent company's CFO showing how Ardian's reckless, ego-driven acquisitions had cost the company nearly $100 million in losses. Sterling Kyle read the summary, his face slowly draining of color. The aggressive, confident litigator seemed to shrink in his expensive suit. He looked up at Ardian, his expression a mixture of awe and terror at the machine they were up against. "We have to stand down, Ardian," Kyle said, his voice a whisper. "This isn't a lawsuit they're threatening. This is a character assassination, and they have the receipts. This isn't a threat, it's an execution order. If we file, they won't just win in court. They will release this. They will destroy you in the press so completely that you will never work in this country again. We have been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and utterly checkmated." That night, Ardian returned to the hotel suite, a man hollowed out by defeat. The last of his hope was gone. He was looking for some small measure of comfort, of human connection in the wreckage. He found Chloe on the phone with her agent, her voice bright and bubbly as she discussed a potential audition. When she hung up, the smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of bored irritation as she saw him. "You look terrible," she said, turning to the mirror to examine her makeup. "I had a bad day," he said, his voice cracking. "Chloe, we need to talk. We need to figure out what we're going to do." "I know what I'm going to do," she said, snapping a tube of lipstick shut. "I'm going to Vancouver next week. There's a new pilot. The part is fantastic." "Vancouver?" he stammered. "But what about us? I blew up my entire life, for you, for us." She finally turned to face him, and her beautiful face was a mask of cold, dismissive pity. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, Ardian, don't be so naive," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You didn't do this for me. You did this for you. This was never about our love story. This was about your pathetic, lifelong psychodrama with your father. You were a little boy throwing a tantrum, trying to prove you could break his favorite toy. I was just the shiny, exciting rock you decided to throw." She walked to the closet and pulled out her already packed suitcases. The problem is you missed. You didn't even scratch his favorite toy. You just managed to set your own treehouse on fire. I attached myself to the heir of an empire, a prince. It turns out you're just a disgraced, unemployed middle manager who is about to be cut off from his trust fund. That is a brand I simply cannot be associated with." She wheeled her suitcases to the door. "Your father, for all his faults, is a man of immense power. He builds things. You," she said, delivering the final, devastating verdict, "just break them, starting with your own life." She opened the door and walked out without a backward glance, leaving him alone in the suffocating silence of the suite, a king in a kingdom of one. His reign officially and irrevocably over. While Ardian's world was being reduced to ashes, Clara's was rising. She had moved into a beautiful, light-filled home on the Seacliff estate, a place of peace and new beginnings. Her days were no longer defined by her husband's moods, but by her own burgeoning purpose. The first official board meeting of the Clara Vance Foundation was a testament to her transformation. She sat at the head of a table filled with some of the sharpest minds her father-in-law employed. Harrison was there, but he sat to the side, a quiet, observant presence, allowing her to command the room. And she did. She presented a comprehensive, 5-year strategic plan, her voice filled with a passion and authority that captivated them all. She spoke of ethical investing, of leveraging their vast resources to create a new paradigm of corporate responsibility. After the meeting, one of the board members, a legendary venture capitalist, approached Harrison. "She's a natural, Harrison," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "She has your strategic mind, but I dare say she has a better heart." Harrison simply nodded, a rare, proud smile touching his lips. Later that evening, Clara walked through the quiet gardens of the estate, the cool evening air a balm on her skin. She felt her daughter kick, a strong, reassuring thump against her ribs. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace. The seed she had witnessed was a story of destruction, a cautionary tale of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had been burned to cinders by his own hubris. But her story, and the story of the child she carried, was just beginning. It would not be a story of inherited power, but of purpose discovered. It was the quiet, unshakable ascent of a new and better kind of legacy. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was not a call from his father's assistant or a text from a family member. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by a stoic legal courier to the hotel suite that had become Ardian's gilded prison. The letter within was cold, formal, and utterly terrifying. It was a legal notice summoning him to a formal meeting at the headquarters of Vance Innovations in 1 week's time. The subject was listed as the restructuring of the Vance Family Trust and the terms of your separation from all Vance-related entities. The list of required attendees included his father, Harrison Vance, Clara Vance, and a team of estate lawyers from the prestigious firm of Albright, Sterling, and Moore. For a week, Ardian oscillated between a state of panicked dread and a flickering, defiant hope. He spent hours pacing the confines of his suite, rehearsing speeches in the mirror. He would be reasonable. He would be remorseful. He would appeal to Clara, to the love they once shared, to the child she was about to bring into the world. He couldn't shake the narcissistic belief that this was all a grand, theatrical gesture on his father's part, a scare tactic designed to bring him to heel. He still believed he could talk his way out of it. He still believed he had a path back. He tried calling Chloe, the actress for whom he had torched his entire world. Her agent answered, informing him with a chilly professionalism that Ms. Sterling was unavailable and wished him all the best in his future endeavors. The finality in the agent's tone was unmistakable. He was utterly, completely alone. The morning of the meeting, he dressed with meticulous care in his finest suit, a final, pathetic attempt to project the power he no longer possessed. He walked into the main conference room at Vance Innovations, a space he had once commanded, and was immediately struck by the cold, deliberate staging of his own execution. His father, Harrison, sat at the head of the impossibly long, polished mahogany table, a silent, unmoving monolith of authority. To his right, in the seat of honor, sat Clara. Now, in her final month of pregnancy, she radiated a serene, unshakable strength. She was no longer the heartbroken wife. She was a matriarch in waiting. On the table before her was not a purse, but a leather-bound portfolio. At the far distant end of the table, on the opposite side, a single isolated chair had been set for him. Facing him were a half-dozen of the most formidable corporate lawyers on the West Coast. He took his seat, the silence in the room a heavy, suffocating blanket. The head lawyer, a stern man in his 60s named Mr. Albright, began without preamble. "Ardian," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "we are here today to formalize the consequences of your recent actions. As you know, the Vance Family Trust, established by your grandfather, is the legal instrument that governs the family's assets and your position within its corporate structures." He opened a thick binder. Article 7, Section 4 of the Trust, a section I believe you have a copy of, is what is commonly referred to as the Character and Integrity Clause. It grants the acting patriarch broad, discretionary power to amend or revoke a beneficiary's inheritance in the event that said beneficiary engages in conduct that brings public disrepute upon the Vance name or acts in a manner that willfully destabilizes the family's core business interests. Albright looked at Ardian over the top of his reading glasses. "It is your father's legal position that your actions at the philanthropy gala, the public and cruel dissolution of your marriage to a pregnant spouse, and the subsequent instability and reputational damage your behavior has caused, represent a profound and unequivocal violation of this clause." Ardian opened his mouth to protest, but Albright held up a hand. "Let me be clear. What follows is not a negotiation. It is a dissemination of information regarding decisions that have already been made and legally ratified." For the next 20 minutes, Albright methodically dismantled Ardian's life, piece by piece. His employment with Vance Media and all other Vance entities was terminated, effective immediately. All unvested stock options were voided. His corporate credit cards, accounts, and access privileges had already been revoked. Then came the final, devastating blow. "The matter of your inheritance has been restructured," Albright continued, turning a page. "Your primary share of the Vance Family Trust, which would have passed to you upon your father's death, has been legally and irrevocably redirected. A new, independent trust has been formed. The sole beneficiary of this new trust will be your biological child and any future children you may have with Clara Vance." Ardian stared, his mind struggling to keep up. His child. He still had a connection. "This new trust," Albright said, delivering the coup de grace, "will be managed by 2 co-trustees who will have sole discretion over all assets until the beneficiary reaches the age of 30. Those co-trustees will be your father, Harrison Vance, and the child's mother, Clara Vance." The room spun. It was a complete and total erasure. He would be a ghost, a footnote in his own child's immense fortune, a fortune that would be controlled by his ex-wife and the father who despised him. This isn't legal," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. "You can't just take my birthright." He turned his desperate gaze to Clara. "Clara, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't let him do this. Think of our child, our family." Clara met his gaze, and for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was not angry, not vengeful, but filled with a steely resolve. "I am thinking of my child, Ardian," she said. In fact, she is the only thing I have thought about for the past month. And I have come to realize that the greatest gift I can ever give her is a life free from your influence, a life where she is not exposed to your cruelty, your instability, and your profound lack of character. This isn't something my father-in-law is doing to you. This is the direct consequence of what you did to us. Ardian, shattered by her words, turned his wild, pleading eyes to his father. "Father, please." Harrison Vance finally spoke, his voice a low, rumbling earthquake of finality. "Your grandfather was a wise man, Ardian. He understood that an empire is not preserved by blood alone, but by character. He built this company from nothing with his bare hands and the force of his will. I have spent my life honoring that legacy, building upon it, and you treated it like a plaything. You used the power and security it gave you not to build, but to indulge your own petty vanities and insecurities." He stood up, the full, intimidating force of his presence filling the room. "You stand here, and you talk of your birthright. You have no birthright. You have squandered it. You have proven you are not a builder. You are a vandal, and I will not stand by and watch a vandal destroy my life's work." He gestured toward Clara. "She has the one thing you never will, Ardian. She has character. She has integrity. She is a builder. The future of this family and this company is safer in her hands than it ever was in yours." Mr. Albright slid one final document across the table. It was a separation agreement, offering a one-time, lump-sum payment of $10 million, a fraction of his lost inheritance. In exchange, he would waive all future claims. It was a choice between walking away with a fortune most people only dream of, or fighting and being left with absolutely nothing. With a hand that shook so violently he could barely hold the pen, Ardian signed his name. He signed away his company, his inheritance, his family, his future. He stood up from his isolated chair, a man utterly hollowed out, and walked from the room without another word. As he passed through the gleaming lobby of the company his grandfather had founded, the employees, his former employees, averted their eyes. He was already a ghost. A month later, Clara gave birth to a beautiful, healthy daughter. She named her Clara, a classic, strong name, a name with no ties to the recent, painful past. In the quiet, sunlit hospital room, Harrison Vance held his granddaughter for the first time, his stern, powerful face transformed by a look of absolute, unconditional love. He looked at Clara, her face filled with the tired, joyful glow of new motherhood. The succession was complete. The future of the House of Vance was secure. 2 years later, the Grand Hall of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art was filled with the bright, optimistic energy of the city's tech and philanthropic communities. It was the inaugural gala for the Clara Vance Foundation. At the podium stood its president, Clara Vance, a woman radiating a confidence and purpose that was entirely her own. "Legacy," she said to the rapt audience, "is often thought of as something we inherit, a name, a fortune. But I believe true legacy is something we build. It is built through our actions, through our integrity, and through our commitment to leaving the world a little better than we found it." She went on to announce the Foundation's first major initiative, a massive funding project for high-quality, accessible educational programming for children, the very project Ardian had dismissed as a waste of time. From a table near the front, Harrison Vance watched his granddaughter, Clara, asleep in her stroller beside him. He saw the strength, the vision, the character in the woman on the stage. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had made the right choice. He had been forced to amputate a part of his own bloodline to save his empire, a choice that would haunt him in his quietest moments. But as he looked at Clara, and then at the sleeping child who would one day inherit it all, he understood that he had not lost a son. He had gained a daughter, and in doing so had secured a future for the Vance name far greater than Ardian could ever have conceived. The reckoning was over. The rebuilding had begun. Ardian Vance's cruel betrayal, meant to be a declaration of his own freedom, instead triggered his complete and total ruin. He mistakenly believed that his bloodline made him untouchable. But his father, the legendary billionaire Harrison Vance, made a choice dictated not by blood, but by character, choosing his honorable daughter-in-law over his own disgraced son. This is a stunning story of family dynamics, corporate power, and the ultimate triumph of integrity over inheritance. While Ardian was left with nothing, Clara rose from the ashes to become a powerful leader, reshaping the Vance legacy in her own image.
The polished steel door hissed open, a sound he usually associated with success, with finality. But tonight it was a prelude to silence, an unnatural, heavy silence that clung to the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. He called her name, the sound swallowed by the cavernous living room overlooking the city's glittering heart. He found her in the nursery, curled on the floor beside the unassembled crib, her body trembling with sobs that seemed to tear from her very soul. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, and in that moment, seeing her broken, he knew their perfect life was a lie. The elevator ascended the 52 floors in a whisper of polished chrome and silent mechanics. A vertical journey he made a dozen times a day. It was his seamless transition from one world to another, from the concrete canyons where he wrestled financial beasts to the sterile tranquility of his skyborn sanctuary. He was a man who had built an empire from the rubble of a broken childhood, a titan of industry whose name was etched onto skyscrapers and whispered in boardrooms. He craved order, predictability. The gentle ding of the elevator arriving at his private floor was usually the sound of his world settling into its perfect, hard-won equilibrium. Tonight, however, a discordant note hummed beneath the surface. The deal had been a monster, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that had consumed him for the better part of 3 months. It had been grueling, a marathon of sleepless nights, transatlantic flights, and enough caffeine to power a small city. But they had won. He had won. The victor's spoils were waiting, a glass of 18-year-old single malt and the soft embrace of his wife. The heavy door, keyed only to his thumbprint and hers, swung inward without a sound. "I'm home," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous foyer. The space was an ode to minimalist wealth, a single dramatic sculpture twisted toward the 30-foot ceiling, its shadow dancing on walls of imported Italian marble. There were no family photos, no clutter, no signs of life beyond the faint, clean scent of ozone from the air filtration system. It was a home designed to impress, a fortress built to keep the chaos of the world at bay. Usually she would be there to greet him, a warm, living counterpoint to the apartment's cold perfection. She would emerge from the kitchen, her face dusted with flour, or from her art studio, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek, and the entire sterile expanse would suddenly feel like a home. Her laughter was the only color that truly mattered in this monochromatic world he had built. But tonight there was only silence, a profound, unnerving quiet that seemed to absorb the sound of his own breathing. He loosened his tie, his gaze sweeping the living area. The skyline of the city glittered beyond the panoramic windows, a sprawling galaxy of artificial light that he, in part, owned. Yet the view offered no comfort. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach, a primal instinct he'd learned to trust on the trading floor. Something was wrong. He walked through the archway leading to the residential wing, his expensive leather shoes making soft, apologetic sounds on the marble. Her studio door was ajar, but the room was dark. The kitchen was pristine, untouched. He moved faster now, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He pictured her, imagined her tripping, falling. The baby, their baby, the one thing in his life that felt truly pure, truly his. He found her in the nursery. The room was painted a soft, gender-neutral yellow, a concession to her desire for a surprise. It was the one room in the penthouse that felt entirely hers, filled with hand-painted watercolors of whimsical animals and a bookshelf groaning with classic children's stories. A custom-made crib, a ridiculously expensive piece of sculpted oak, lay in pieces on the plush rug, its assembly instructions discarded nearby. And beside it, curled into a tight ball, was his wife. Her back was to him, her shoulders shaking with violent, silent sobs. The sight was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. In the 4 years they had been married, he had seen her cry only twice. Once during a tragically sad movie, and again on the day they learned she was pregnant. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This was different. This was the sound of a heartbreaking, a desolate, gut-wrenching grief that had no place in their carefully constructed world. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her back, afraid that his touch might shatter her completely. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "What is it? What's wrong?" She flinched at his voice, pulling herself tighter. A small, wounded sound escaped her lips. He could see the tracks of her tears glistening on her cheeks in the dim light filtering in from the hallway. Her beautiful face, the face he saw in his dreams, was swollen and blotchy with sorrow. "Talk to me," he pleaded, his own control beginning to fray. He was a man of action, a fixer of problems. He could negotiate hostile takeovers and crush competitors. But this raw, unfiltered pain left him feeling utterly helpless. He reached out again, this time resting his hand gently on her shoulder. Her skin was cold. "Is it the baby? Is the baby okay?" She shook her head, a violent, jerky motion. "The baby's fine," she choked out, her voice so hoarse it was almost unrecognizable. Relief warred with confusion. If not the baby, then what? What could possibly have happened in the 12 hours since he'd left for the office that could reduce his vibrant, resilient wife to this shattered heap on the nursery floor? He looked around the room, searching for a clue, a reason. His eyes landed on her phone, lying screened down on the rug a few feet away. A small, dark corner of his mind, the part that had clawed its way to the top, whispered a question he didn't want to ask. He had given her everything, a life of unimaginable luxury, security, his unwavering devotion. What could possibly bring her this much pain? As he knelt there, the silence of the penthouse pressing in, he felt the first terrifying crack appear in the foundation of his perfect life. He helped her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms as if she were made of delicate glass. She felt fragile, her movements stiff and uncoordinated. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on the floor, on the scattered pieces of the unassembled crib, as if they represented the unassembled fragments of their life at that moment. He led her from the nursery, the soft yellow walls suddenly feeling mocking and cheerful, and guided her to the living room. He sat her down on the sprawling white sofa, a piece of furniture that cost more than the house he'd grown up in. He then went to the bar, his movements automatic, and poured a glass of water, his hand shaking so slightly that only he would notice. The single malt he'd been craving now seemed obscene. He brought the water to her, pressing the cold glass into her trembling hands. "Drink," he said softly. It was a command, but tempered with a gentleness he reserved only for her. She took a small, shuddering sip, the condensation from the glass dripping onto her simple maternity dress. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but inside their glass tower, time had seemed to stop. He sat on the ottoman opposite her, leaning forward, trying to read her face, but she had become a stranger to him in the space of an hour. The open, expressive woman he loved had been replaced by this shuttered, guarded figure. "Tell me what happened," he urged, keeping his voice level, fighting the tide of panic rising in his chest. "Did someone call? Did you get bad news?" He thought of her parents, aging but healthy, who lived a quiet life in the countryside, funded by his generosity. "Is it your mother? Your father?" She shook her head, a listless, barely perceptible movement. "No, they're fine." Her voice was a monotone, devoid of its usual warmth. "Then what is it?" The question came out sharper than he intended, a sliver of his boardroom impatience cutting through his concern. He immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry," he said, softening his tone. "I'm just worried. I've never seen you like this." A tear escaped and traced a slow path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. "I'm just tired," she whispered, the words so faint he had to strain to hear them. "It's the hormones, I guess. Overwhelmed. I was trying to build the crib and I just couldn't do it. It was the most pathetic lie he had ever heard. This was not a woman frustrated by flat-pack furniture. This was a woman hollowed out by grief. His mind raced, cataloging possibilities. Financial trouble? Impossible. A health scare she was hiding? Unlikely. He had access to the best doctors in the world. A fight with a friend? She didn't have many close friends. Their life was insulated, private, just the way he liked it. The dark whisper from the nursery returned, louder this time. Her phone. He saw it, still lying on the nursery floor in his mind's eye. An affair. The thought was a venomous serpent, coiling in his gut. It was a cliché, the bored, beautiful wife of a wealthy, work-obsessed man seeking comfort elsewhere. But it didn't fit. She wasn't like that. Their connection was real, deep. He had staked his entire emotional life on that certainty. He loved her with a desperate, possessive intensity that bordered on worship. She was the one good thing that had ever happened to him, the anchor that kept him from drifting into the cold, empty space of his own ambition. The idea that she could betray that, it was unthinkable. It would be the end of him. He pushed the thought away, disgusted with himself for even considering it. He was letting his exhaustion and fear get the better of him. He had to trust her. Okay, he said slowly, choosing his words with care. Okay, you're overwhelmed. I get it. I've been absent. This deal took everything. I'm sorry. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. It was limp and cold in his grasp. I'm back now. It's over. I'm all yours. We'll build the crib together this weekend. We'll do whatever you want. He was offering an olive branch, a return to normalcy. He expected her to squeeze his hand, to offer a small, watery smile, to let him in. Instead, she slowly pulled her hand away, tucking it into her lap as if his touch had burned her. The rejection was a quiet, devastating blow. I think I'm just going to go to bed, she said, her voice still flat and distant. She rose from the sofa, her movements slow and deliberate, the swell of her belly a prominent silhouette against the city lights. She didn't look at him as she walked away, her posture rigid, her shoulders slumped. He watched her go, a chasm opening between them with every step she took. The porcelain mask of her composure was firmly in place, but he had seen the cracks. He had seen the raw, primal agony beneath it. And her lie, her flimsy, insulting lie, was more terrifying than any truth she could have told him, because it meant she was hiding something. Something she believed was so terrible, so catastrophic, that she couldn't share it with him. He sat there for a long time, the silence of the apartment pressing down on him. The city lights blurred through the window, the triumphant glitter of his success now feeling like a mockery. He had built this gilded cage for them, a fortress of wealth to protect them from the harsh realities of the world. But he was beginning to realize that the real danger wasn't outside the walls. It was already inside, sitting in the dark, and he had no idea what it was. His gaze drifted back toward the nursery, and the image of her phone face down on the rug burned in his mind. Sleep did not come. He lay beside her in the king-sized bed, a vast, empty expanse separating their bodies. He could hear her breathing, a shallow, unsteady rhythm that was a world away from her usual deep and peaceful slumber. Every time she shifted, every time a small sigh escaped her lips, the tension in his own body ratcheted tighter. He was a man accustomed to control, to having data, to understanding the variables in any equation. Her sorrow was a variable he couldn't quantify, an unknown that was tearing his ordered world apart. His mind, a relentless engine of analysis and strategy, refused to rest. It replayed the scene in the nursery over and over, dissecting every detail, the force of her sobs, the way she flinched from his touch, the hollowness in her eyes, and the lie, the insultingly simple lie. It's the hormones. She had never patronized him before. Their relationship had been built on a foundation of mutual respect and brutal honesty. He had told her about his past, the dirt-poor, violent upbringing he had fought so hard to escape. He'd shown her the scars, both literal and figurative, and she had traced them with a tenderness that had healed parts of him he didn't know were broken. In return, she had been his open book, until now. He slipped out of bed, the motion fluid and silent. The moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor as he padded back into the living area. The apartment felt different at this hour, less like a home and more like a museum after closing time. Cold, silent, and filled with expensive ghosts. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sleeping city. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a boy, hiding in a closet while his parents destroyed each other and everything around them. That was where his obsession with control came from. He had vowed to never again be a victim of chaos, to build walls so high and thick that nothing could ever hurt him. He'd built them around his heart, too. She was the only one he had ever let inside. He found himself walking towards the nursery, drawn by an invisible thread of dread. The door was slightly ajar, just as he'd left it. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the room in a pale, ethereal glow. The whimsical animals on the walls seemed to watch him with knowing eyes. His gaze fell immediately to the spot where her phone had been. It was gone. Of course. She must have retrieved it when she'd gone to the bathroom before bed. He scanned the room again, his eyes sharp, searching for, he didn't know what, a misplaced object, a note, anything out of the ordinary. His attention settled on the changing table. Alongside the neatly stacked diapers and jars of cream was her handbag, a stylish leather tote he'd bought her in Paris. It was unzipped. She was usually meticulous about her things. A war raged within him. His rational mind screamed at him to stop, to go back to bed, to trust his wife and talk to her in the morning, to not become the suspicious, paranoid man he despised. But the other part of him, the street kid who had survived by trusting his gut, was screaming louder. It was telling him that the answer, the source of her pain, was within reach. His heart hammered against his ribs as he reached into the bag. His fingers brushed against her wallet, a set of keys, a tube of lipstick. And then they closed around a small rectangular piece of cardstock. He pulled it out. It was a business card. The material was thick, expensive, the lettering embossed in a simple, elegant font. It was for a law firm, a high-end, notoriously discreet firm that specialized in one thing: family law, divorce, custody battles. He stared at the card, the name of the senior partner seeming to burn into his retinas. Why would she have this? The question exploded in his mind, shattering his last vestiges of denial. There was no innocent explanation. You don't consult a divorce lawyer because you're having a bad day. He sank down onto the small rocking chair in the corner, the business card trembling in his hand. The serpent of doubt he had tried to suppress now uncoiled with a vengeance, sinking its fangs deep into his heart. An affair. It had to be. She had found someone else. She was planning to leave him, to take his child. The thought was a physical agony, a white-hot poker twisting in his gut. He thought of all the late nights, the missed dinners, the trips he'd taken without her. Had he pushed her away? Had his obsession with building their perfect future blinded him to the crumbling of their present? He remembered a conversation from a few weeks ago. He'd been on the phone, pacing, barking orders at a subordinate. She had been watching him, a strange, sad expression on her face. When he'd hung up, she'd asked him, "Do you ever think about just stopping? Selling everything and moving to that little cottage by the sea we talked about?" He had laughed. "And do what? Go bankrupt in a year? Don't be silly. I do this for us. For our son. Or daughter," she had corrected him softly, a faint smile on her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. He hadn't seen the sadness then, but he saw it now. He had dismissed her dream as childish fantasy, too busy architecting their gilded cage to notice she felt trapped inside it. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt the cold sweat of panic on his brow. The empire he had built suddenly meant nothing. The money, the power, the prestige. It was all just a pile of ashes. She was the foundation of his world, and that foundation was crumbling into dust. His past came rushing back, the raw, visceral memory of his own father packing a bag, his mother's shattered sobs echoing in the tiny, squalid apartment. He was becoming his father, the work-obsessed husband whose wife sought solace in another's arms. The cycle he had sworn to break was repeating itself. He sat there in the moonlight, in the room meant for their future, holding the proof of his failure. The silence of the apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of unspoken words, of her quiet unhappiness, of his own willful blindness. And for the first time in his adult life, the man who had an answer for everything had no idea what to do. The next morning was a masterclass in avoidance. She moved around the kitchen with a brittle, almost frantic energy, making coffee, slicing fruit, her movements sharp and precise. The porcelain mask was firmly back in place, her face a carefully blank slate. She offered him a smile that was a perfect, beautiful lie. It didn't reach her eyes. Those lovely, expressive eyes were dull, their depths shadowed by the storm he knew was raging behind them. He played his part too. He talked about the market, about a minor issue with a subsidiary in Tokyo, about the weather. The conversation was a fragile bridge of meaningless words built over a chasm of unspoken truths. He watched her, looking for a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the broken woman from the night before. But she was gone, replaced by this eerily calm automaton. The business card felt like a lead weight in his pocket. Every time he moved, he could feel its sharp corners, a constant, nagging reminder of his discovery. He wanted to throw it on the table, to demand an explanation, to shatter the fragile piece with the force of his fear and anger, but he couldn't. He was terrified of the answer. If he confronted her and she confirmed his fears, his world would end, right there over breakfast. So he said nothing. He drank his coffee, the bitter liquid scalding his throat, and retreated behind his own mask of calm professionalism. It was a stalemate of silence, a cold war waged across a marble kitchen island. When he left for the office, she walked him to the door, a ritual they had performed every morning of their marriage. She rose on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. Her lips were cold. "Have a good day," she said, her voice perfectly even. "You too," he replied, the words feeling like a betrayal. In the elevator, he pulled out the business card again. Matheson, Hayes, and Finch, family law specialists. He took out his phone and, with a sense of profound self-loathing, typed the firm's name into the search engine. Their website was as sleek and intimidating as the card. They boasted of their discretion, their tenacity, their success in high-net-worth divorces. Reading the testimonials from satisfied clients felt like reading the obituaries of failed marriages. His entire day was a charade. He sat in meetings, his mind a million miles away. He stared at spreadsheets, the numbers blurring into meaningless patterns. His team, accustomed to his laser focus and decisive commands, exchanged worried glances as he issued vague, non-committal responses. The titan of industry was a ghost at his own throne. He couldn't shake the image of her, broken on the nursery floor. Even if she was leaving him, even if she had betrayed him, that level of grief didn't make sense. There was more to the story. There had to be. He needed proof. He needed to know. The not knowing was a poison, seeping into every corner of his mind. And so, he did something he had sworn he would never do. He called his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Ben, who could find out anything about anyone. "I have a personal matter," he said, his voice low. "It requires absolute discretion." "Of course," Ben replied, his tone unwavering. There was no judgment, no surprise. He was a tool, and a ruthlessly efficient one. He gave Ben the name of the law firm and the partner on the card. Then, with a knot of sickness in his stomach, he asked him to run a quiet check on his wife's communications. Phone records, emails, credit card statements. "I need to know everything, Ben. Everything." "It will be done," Ben said, and the line went dead. The rest of the afternoon was torture. Every ping of his phone made him jump. He paced his office like a caged animal, the stunning view of the city he commanded now feeling like a prison. He was betraying her trust, invading her privacy, becoming the very person he never wanted to be. But the fear was stronger than his principles. The fear of losing her, of losing his child, was an all-consuming fire. At 4 o'clock, an encrypted email arrived from Ben. It contained a single password-protected file. His hands trembled as he typed in the code. The file opened and a list of documents appeared. Phone records, bank statements, emails. He clicked on the phone records first. He scanned the list of numbers, his heart pounding. There were no secrets there. Calls to her parents, her obstetrician, a few friends. Nothing out of the ordinary. No long, late-night calls to a mystery number. A flicker of hope ignited within him. Next, the credit card statements. He scrolled through the transactions. Flowers for her mother, books from an online store, maternity clothes, a large purchase from a high-end baby boutique. Then he saw it, a recurring monthly charge, a significant one, $1,500 every month for the past 6 months. The recipient was a nondescript holding company he didn't recognize. He made a note to have Ben trace it. Finally, the emails. Ben had only been able to retrieve metadata in a few fragmented chains from a deleted items folder she must have forgotten to clear. Most of it was junk mail, newsletters, online shopping confirmations. He was about to close the file, a wave of relief and guilt washing over him, when he saw a subject line that made his blood run cold. It was from an address he didn't recognize. The subject, the arrangement. He clicked on it. The body of the email was short, just a few lines. The next transfer is scheduled for the 15th. As agreed, no further contact is necessary unless there is an emergency. Please confirm receipt. It was dated 2 days ago. He checked the sender's address. It was a jumble of letters and numbers from a Proton mail account. Untraceable. He looked at the date of the first payment on the credit card statement. It was just a few days after she had told him she was pregnant. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. His mind reeled, trying to piece it together. A secret, untraceable email address, a recurring, clandestine payment, the business card for a divorce lawyer. It all pointed to one unavoidable conclusion, but it still didn't add up. Why the elaborate secrecy? Why the payments? If she were having an affair, why would she be paying someone? He felt like he was losing his mind. He was chasing a ghost, a digital breadcrumb trail that led only to more questions. He looked out the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was time to go home. Time to face the stranger who shared his bed. He now knew he couldn't confront her with this. Not yet. He had fragments, suspicions, but not the whole truth. And he had a terrifying premonition that the whole truth was something far more complex and far more devastating than a simple affair. The drive home was surreal. The familiar streets and landmarks of his city seemed alien, as if he were seeing them through a distorted lens. The man who had left his home that morning was not the same man returning. The morning version had been a husband, worried and confused. This version was an investigator, a prosecutor, armed with fragments of evidence that painted a damning, yet incomplete picture. The weight of the encrypted file felt heavier than any corporate portfolio he had ever managed. He let himself into the apartment, the silence greeting him like an old, unwelcome friend. He found her in the kitchen, not cooking, but staring out the window, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She turned as he entered, and for a fleeting second he saw it again. The raw vulnerability from the night before, a flicker of fear in her eyes before the mask slammed back down. "You're home early," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Finished up," he lied, placing his briefcase on the counter. "How was your day?" "Quiet. I read for a while." She gestured to a book lying on the island. The title was What to Expect When You're Expecting. The irony was a physical blow. He couldn't do it. He couldn't play this game anymore. The charade was choking him, poisoning the very air between them. He had to know the truth, no matter how much it destroyed him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. The forced cheerfulness vanished from her face, replaced by a guarded, wary expression. "Okay," she said slowly, her hand tightening on her stomach. "About what?" He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I know you're unhappy, and I know it's more than just hormones." He watched her face for a reaction, but she remained unnervingly still. "Last night I found this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the business card, placing it on the marble island between them. It lay there, a small white rectangle of impending doom. He saw her eyes flicker towards it, and a tremor went through her body. He saw her swallow hard. "Why do you have a card for a divorce lawyer?" he asked, his voice shaking, despite his efforts to keep it steady. "Are you planning on leaving me?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing he had ever heard. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren from the street below, the frantic beating of his own heart. She stared at the card, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. They were filled with a swirling vortex of emotions he couldn't decipher. Fear, yes, but also a profound sadness and something that looked like pity. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "I'm not leaving you." "Then what is this?" he pressed, his voice rising. "What are the secret payments for? Who are you sending $1,500 to every month? What is the arrangement?" Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks until she was as white as the marble countertop. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked trapped, terrified. "I hired an investigator," he confessed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I had to know. I thought you were having an affair." A single harsh, broken sound escaped her lips. It might have been a laugh or a sob. "An affair," she choked out, her voice cracking. "You think this is about an affair?" She pushed herself away from the counter and staggered back, her eyes wide with a wild, desperate pain. God, if only it were that simple. And then, the dam broke. The carefully constructed walls of her composure didn't just crack, they exploded. The grief she had been suppressing erupted with the force of a tidal wave. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, her body convulsing with sobs that were terrifying in their intensity. He rushed to her side, his anger and suspicion evaporating, replaced by the same overwhelming fear he'd felt in the nursery. He tried to hold her, but she pushed him away. "Don't!" she screamed, her voice raw with agony. "Don't touch me!" He recoiled as if struck. He knelt a few feet away, helpless, as her anguish filled the room. "It's not what you think," she gasped between sobs, her words fragmented and broken. "The money, the lawyer, it's not for me." "Then who?" he pleaded, his mind struggling to process her words. "Who is it for?" She looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and despair. And in her eyes he saw a truth so devastating it would rewrite his entire world. "It's for my sister," she whispered. The words hung in the air, nonsensical. He stared at her, utterly bewildered. "Your sister? You don't have a sister. You're an only child." He knew her family. He'd met her parents dozens of times. He'd seen the photo albums from her childhood. There was no sister. "I do," she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "I have a twin sister. No one knows. My parents. They gave her up for adoption when we were born." His mind went blank. He couldn't make sense of it. A twin sister, a secret she had kept from him for their entire relationship. It felt impossible, like a plot from a melodramatic novel. "They were young," she continued, the story pouring out of her now, a torrent of long-buried secrets. "Terrified. They could only afford to keep one of us, so they kept me, and they gave her away. They made a choice, and they made me promise to never, ever tell anyone. It was the family's great shame." He could only stare, speechless. The foundation of his reality was cracking beneath him. The woman he thought he knew better than himself was a stranger. "I found her 6 months ago," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I hired a private investigator. I had to know if she was okay, and I found her." She paused, another wave of sobs shaking her. "And she is not okay. She's the opposite of okay." She took a ragged breath, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the walls of their penthouse. "Her life. It's been hard. The family that adopted her, the father was abusive. She ran away when she was 16. She has a son. He's 7 years old. And her husband, the man she's with now, he's just like the man who raised her. He hurts her. He hurts the boy." Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The family lawyer wasn't for their divorce. It was for hers. The secret monthly payments weren't for a lover. They were a lifeline. "She's trying to leave him," she said, her voice thick with tears and a fierce, protective love. "The money is for a safe house, for food, for her son. The lawyer is helping her build a custody case. She's been documenting the abuse, trying to get enough evidence to take her son and disappear somewhere he can never find them." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a betrayer, but a protector. He saw a woman torn apart by a terrible secret, trying to save a sister she barely knew. The other half of herself who had been dealt a cruel and different fate. The depth of her pain, her grief, it wasn't for herself, it was for her twin. "The night before last," she whispered, her eyes locking with his, "he found out. He found the lawyer's number. He beat her so badly she ended up in the hospital. He threatened to kill her if she ever tried to leave again. He told her he would take her son and she would never see him again. That's why I was crying. I thought he had killed her. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The cold, sterile perfection of their apartment, of their life, seemed to shatter into a million pieces. The suspense of the past 48 hours hadn't been about the potential death of their marriage. It had been about the potential death of a woman he had never known existed. And his wife, his beautiful, brave wife, had been carrying this impossible burden all alone, honoring a promise made before she could even speak, to protect a family secret that was destroying her from the inside out. He had accused her of betrayal while she was in the midst of a desperate secret rescue mission. The shock of it left him breathless. The confession hung in the air between them, shimmering with the weight of decades of silence. The sleek, modern kitchen, a testament to his success and control, now felt like a sterile, inappropriate stage for such a raw and primal revelation. He stared at his wife, this woman who was both intimately familiar and a complete stranger, and felt a profound seismic shift in his understanding of her, of them, of everything. The anger and suspicion he had harbored for the last 2 days had vanished, replaced by a tidal wave of shame so powerful it threatened to drown him. He had been so wrapped up in his own fear, his own wounded pride, that he had been completely blind to her suffering. While he was agonizing over the possibility of a broken heart, she was living in terror of a broken body, not her own, but that of her mirror image, a sister living a nightmare. He slid across the cold marble floor and gathered her into his arms. This time she didn't resist. She collapsed against him, her body boneless with exhaustion and relief, and wept. Not the violent, agonizing sobs of before, but a deep, sorrowful weeping that spoke of years of carried secrets and lonely fear. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, murmuring apologies over and over again. The words inadequate, but all he had. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "God, I am so sorry. For not seeing it. For thinking. For what I accused you of." She just clung to him, her fingers digging into the fabric of his expensive suit jacket. They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the floor of their perfect kitchen, two broken people surrounded by the wreckage of a lie they hadn't even known they were living. Slowly, her crying subsided into shuddering breaths. He helped her up and led her to the sofa. The same sofa where she had pulled her hand from his just 24 hours earlier. The distance that had felt like a continent then was now gone, bridged by the terrible, liberating truth. He sat beside her, keeping a supportive arm around her shoulders as she began to speak, the full story tumbling out in a rush of whispered, painful words. She told him her sister's name. It felt strange on her lips, a name she had only ever written in secret emails or spoken to a lawyer. She described the few furtive meetings they'd had in discreet coffee shops, the shock of looking at a face so like her own, yet so different, hardened by a life he could barely imagine, the eyes carrying a weariness that belied her age. She was the other side of the coin, the result of a single 50-50 decision made by two scared teenagers. While his wife had grown up with piano lessons, private schools, and unconditional love, her sister had grown up in a world of uncertainty and fear. "I look at her," she said, her voice trembling, "and I feel this overwhelming guilt. Why me? Why did I get this life and she got that one? It's not fair." He held her closer, feeling the weight of her misplaced guilt. "It wasn't your choice," he said softly. "None of it was." She told him about her nephew, a small, quiet boy with his mother's eyes. She had only seen photos of him, but she loved him with a fierce, desperate ache. He was the reason for all of this. Her sister would endure the beatings, but she would not let her son grow up thinking that violence was a form of love, that fear was the price of family. As she spoke, he began to understand the true depth of her isolation. She had been navigating this emotional minefield completely on her own, bound by a childhood promise to her parents, a promise that protected their reputation at the cost of her own peace and nearly at the cost of her sister's life. He felt a surge of cold fury towards her parents, whose cowardice had set these tragic events in motion 3 decades ago. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the question not an accusation, but a plea. "I could have helped. We are a team." She finally looked at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Telling you meant breaking the most sacred promise I ever made. It meant unearthing a secret my parents believe would ruin them. And I was afraid you would see me differently, that you would look at me and see this damaged family, this complicated past." She gestured vaguely at their pristine surroundings. "Our life is so perfect, so clean. I didn't want to bring this darkness into it." His heart broke for her. She had been trying to protect him, to protect their gilded cage, from a reality she felt was too ugly for it. He saw now that his obsession with perfection, with order, had inadvertently made her feel like she couldn't show him her messy, complicated human parts. "There is no us without that darkness," he said, his voice firm with a conviction that settled deep in his bones. "Your darkness is my darkness. Your family is my family." He stood up and began to pace, the nervous energy that had plagued him for days now channeling itself into a new, clear purpose. The fixer, the problem solver, was back, but his objective had changed. This wasn't about a corporate takeover. It was about a human rescue. "Where is she now?" he asked, his tone shifting, becoming the decisive commander his employees knew so well. "Is she safe?" "She's at a friend's house," she replied, watching him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "But he knows where the friend lives. She can't stay there for long." "And the boy?" "He's with her. She managed to get him out." "Okay." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his mind already formulating a plan, running through logistics, calculating risks. The helplessness he had felt for the past 2 days was gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. "Okay, this is what we're going to do." In that moment, the power and resources he had amassed, which had felt so meaningless just hours before, suddenly had a purpose. His wealth, his connections, his ruthless efficiency, they weren't just tools for acquiring more wealth. They were tools for salvation. He looked at his wife, her face stained with tears, but her eyes shining with a fragile, nascent hope, and he knew their life would never be the same. The perfect, sterile world he had built was gone forever, and in its place something real, something messy, and something far more meaningful was about to be built. The next 12 hours were a blur of calculated action. The penthouse, once a silent monument to their quiet life, transformed into a tactical command center. The man who had ruthlessly orchestrated corporate acquisitions now applied that same ferocious intensity to a far more important merger: the joining of two fractured families. His first call was to Ben, his head of security. There was no preamble, no evasion. "Change of plans," he said, his voice a low, urgent hum. "Forget the surveillance. We have a new priority: an extraction." He laid out the situation in cold, hard facts. A woman and a 7-year-old child in danger, a violent husband, a need for absolute discretion and speed. Ben, to his credit, didn't ask a single personal question. He simply processed the data and began outlining a strategy. He spoke of safe houses that weren't just apartments, but fortified, untraceable locations. He talked about transport, about legal shields, about creating a digital black hole around the sister and her son, so that the husband, no matter how hard he looked, would find nothing but dead ends. While he handled the logistics, she was on the phone with her sister. Her voice was a low, steady murmur of reassurance, a stark contrast to her earlier hysteria. For the first time, she was not just a secret benefactor, but an active participant, a lifeline. She was giving her sister something more valuable than money: a concrete plan, a pathway to freedom. Hope. He watched her, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, strong, compassionate, and utterly fearless when it came to protecting those she loved. The most difficult call was to the family lawyer whose card had started it all. He made the call himself, with his wife sitting beside him, her hand gripping his. He introduced himself, the weight of his name instantly changing the lawyer's tone from professionally courteous to deferential. "My wife has briefed me on her sister's situation," he said, cutting straight to the point. "The passive, document, and wait approach is over. We are moving to active intervention. I am authorizing you to use the full extent of my resources. I want the best child custody experts, the most aggressive litigators. I want a restraining order so airtight that he can't come within 500 yards of them without triggering an alarm on every police officer's phone in the state. Spare no expense. He was declaring war. He was taking all the power, all the influence he had accumulated, and focusing it like a laser on one man who hurt women and children. It was the purest, most righteous purpose he had ever felt. As dawn approached, casting a soft gray light over the city, the immediate plan was in place. A discreet security team, handpicked by Ben, was already en route to the friend's house. A private jet was being fueled at a suburban airport, ready to take the sister and her son to a secure location in another state. A beautiful house on a quiet lake where they could heal while the legal battle raged. With the logistics handled, an exhausted quiet settled over the apartment. They sat together on the sofa, watching the sunrise paint the sky. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of gravity. They had crossed a point of no return. Their lives were now inextricably linked with a woman and a child they barely knew. Their future, once a predictable trajectory of wealth and comfort, was now a wild, unknown territory. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice soft in the quiet room. This will change everything. It will be messy. It could even be dangerous." He turned to look at her. The morning light caught the exhaustion on her face, but also a newfound strength in her eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, and he meant it. "My whole life, I've been running from the kind of chaos your sister is in. I built all of this," he gestured to the opulent room, "to keep it out. But I was wrong. You don't fight chaos by building walls. You fight it by facing it head on, by protecting the people you love." He took her hand. "He is a monster of the same breed that created me. The difference is, I have the power to stop him. If I don't use it, then what's the point of any of this?" A single tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it was not a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of gratitude, of overwhelming love. There was one last piece of business, one final secret to confront. "Your parents," he said gently, "they need to know. You can't carry this for them anymore." She flinched, the instinctive fear of a lifetime of obedience still present. "They'll never understand. They'll be horrified." "Maybe," he conceded, "or maybe they'll finally have a chance to atone for a mistake that has haunted 3 lives for 30 years. Either way, the truth has to come out. The secret is what's been poisoning everyone." He saw the struggle in her eyes, the war between her duty as a daughter and her new, fierce loyalty to her sister. He saw the moment she made her choice. It wasn't a choice between 2 family members. It was a choice for truth over silence, for courage over fear. "You're right," she said, her voice firm. "I'll call them after she's safe." This was their new beginning, forged in the crucible of a crisis. They were no longer just a wealthy couple living in a penthouse. They were a team, a family unit expanding to include the broken and the lost. They were choosing to step out of their gilded cage and into the messy, complicated, and beautiful reality of the world. The life they were building now would not be perfect, but it would be real. And it would be built not on a foundation of wealth, but on a foundation of love, sacrifice, and a shared, unwavering purpose. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. 2 days later, they stood in the arrivals hall of a small, private airfield 1,000 miles from home. The air was clean and crisp, smelling of pine and open water. It was a world away from the concrete and ambition of the city. He stood slightly behind his wife, his hand resting on the small of her back, a silent, steadying presence. She was vibrating with a nervous energy, her eyes fixed on the door that led to the tarmac. The door opened and a woman walked through. For a moment, his breath caught in his throat. It was like looking at a distorted reflection of his wife. She had the same eyes, the same bone structure, the same curve of her lips. But her face was thinner, her skin had a sallow tint of exhaustion, and there was a map of hardship etched into the lines around her eyes. A fresh, ugly bruise colored her left cheekbone, a stark reminder of the reality they had just pulled her from. She moved with a skittish, hesitant gait, as if expecting a blow at any moment. Clinging to her hand was a small, pale boy with enormous, haunted eyes that seemed too big for his face. He stared at the floor, his shoulders hunched, trying to make himself as small as possible. His wife took a tentative step forward. "It's me," she whispered. The sister looked up, and her eyes, so like his wife's, filled with a mixture of disbelief, relief, and a lifetime of unspoken questions. She let go of her son's hand and rushed forward, and the two women, two halves of a whole, collided in a fierce, desperate embrace. They wept in each other's arms, 30 years of separation and silence, melting away in a torrent of shared tears. It was a reunion and a mourning all at once. Mourning for the childhood they never had, the sisterhood they were robbed of. He watched them, his own eyes burning. He felt like an intruder on a moment so sacred, so profoundly intimate. He looked at the little boy, who stood frozen, watching his mother with a look of profound confusion and fear. He knelt slowly, so as not to startle him. "Hi there," he said softly. "I'm your uncle." The boy just stared, his eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't know what an uncle was, not really. The men in his life had not been kind. This man was different. He didn't loom. He spoke quietly. He had kind eyes. The reunion at the airfield was the beginning of a long, difficult road. The new house by the lake was not a magical cure. The sister was plagued by nightmares. The boy, her nephew, didn't speak a word for the first 3 weeks. He was a ghost in the house, flinching at loud noises and sudden movements. The trauma they had endured was a deep, festering wound that would take years to heal. But they were safe, and they were not alone. His wife stayed with them for the first month, a constant, loving presence. She and her sister spent hours just talking, piecing together the disparate fragments of their lives, forging a bond that was both brand new and ancient. He flew out every weekend, leaving his empire in the capable hands of his subordinates. He brought groceries and toys. He spent his time not in boardrooms, but sitting on the floor, patiently building elaborate Lego castles, hoping to coax a word, a smile, from his silent nephew. The legal battle was brutal, just as he had anticipated. The husband was a cornered, vicious animal. He fought dirty, leveling false accusations, trying to paint the sister as an unfit mother. But he was no match for the legal army his money had assembled. And more importantly, he was no match for the truth. The call to their parents was the hardest part. His wife made it from the house by the lake with her sister holding her hand. The reaction was exactly what she had predicted. Shock, denial, then shame, and horrified regret. There were tears and recriminations. The carefully constructed facade of their perfect family had been shattered forever. The healing there, if it ever came, would be a fragile and uncertain thing. But the truth was out. The secret had lost its power. 3 months later, he and his wife were back in the nursery in their penthouse. This time, they were building the crib together. He tightened a final screw and stood back, admiring their handiwork. It was solid, sturdy, ready. His wife came and stood beside him, her belly now a proud, full globe. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "She called today," she said quietly. "Oh yeah, how are they?" "Good, really good." A smile touched her lips. "He spoke to me, on the phone. He told me he loves his new room, and he asked when he could see his cousin." He felt a lump form in his throat. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her and their unborn child close. The gilded cage had been broken open. Their world was no longer pristine or predictable. It was messy, complicated, and filled with broken people. But it was also filled with hope, with healing, and with a fierce, unconditional love that was stronger than any wall he could ever build. Their family wasn't just the 3 of them anymore. It was 5. A strange, fractured, and beautiful family, forged in a crucible of secrets and lies, and saved by a single courageous choice. The city lights glittered outside, but for the first time, he wasn't looking at his empire. He was looking at his world, and it was finally, truly whole. So, what would you have done? If you came home to find the love of your life in pieces, and every clue pointed to the ultimate betrayal, would you have hired an investigator? Would you have risked destroying everything to find the truth? Or would you have trusted even in the face of damning evidence? Let me know in the comments below.